Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, Camille and I take a look back at this two-game stretch. Not a win streak yet until you hit three. But the two games we've seen from the Bucks, is it a sign of the run that Doc Rivers was alluding to coming, or are we just grasping at fool's gold here? We get into that conversation and preview the matchup with the Hornets after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. And your free podcast, your favorite podcast, now a newsletter, as we introduce the Locked On Bucks daily newsletter, a one-stop shop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That is lockedondaily.com, and start your day with the all-new and free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Should also tell you today's episode of Locked On Bucks brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. Get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. 2 straight wins, Camille. And, you know, I think we kind of talked about this the last time that you and I were together, and that the process has been much better. Doc, Giannis, everybody had said it as well. Like, overall, I understand there's, the last 2 weeks, I think, especially, and it's already come to that when it's a 4-week season so far. And we're saying, hey, the last 2 weeks have been good. Save for that Grizzlies game and the Knicks game as well. But other than that, the Bucks have been pretty good in the last 2 weeks. I think they're 3-4, and 3 of those 4 losses are to the Cavs and Celtics by 9 total points in those 3 games. You did have 2 clunkers, but the defense has been, I think, 14th, 13th, somewhere around there since then. In the half court, it's around the same too. So we're starting to see movement there. And I know it's going to come up. I get it. It hasn't been great teams that the Bucks have played. But at some point you just need, for your own confidence and to see the process working, like, you just have to do that against inferior opponents and win these games and use that as a springboard. And also, it's something we haven't seen the Bucks do the last couple of years.
That part of it. Like last year, we have quite a few post games, quite a few episodes talking about how did the Bucks lose to this team. Like that Memphis game comes to mind to me every single time before All-Star break last season. When like I said, they had that injury list, the Grizzlies did, that was longer than the CVS receipt. You had the stretch towards the end of the season where they were losing to like the Wizards and all kinds of teams that you just did not expect. The Bucks' problem last season was never, getting up for good competition and coming out with the effort, with the execution against those better teams. Like we saw them throttle the Thunder in Milwaukee. The problem has always been for this team, at least last year, looking at it, those other teams. So this year's squad for the Milwaukee Bucks, to see them come out, have those losses to the Bulls, to the Nets, it felt like, are we going to do this again? Where it's like you don't come out with the proper execution, proper mindset, proper focus against teams that you feel like are quote unquote lesser comp. So to see them compete against Cleveland, really close, lost those 2 games by combined 3 points. See them compete with Boston for at least 3 of the 4 quarters in each of those games. That's what you expected. So for me to be able to see them get the win over the Jazz, to see them come back and get that win over the Pistons with Giannis dropping 59, it took a lot for the Bucks to get that Pistons win. Let's not, sell that short, but they got the win. And at this point in the season, with how the losses have been stacking up for them, it's important for them to just start building those losses and starting to dig out of the hole they created for themselves early in this season. So again, I see some progress happening, but I won't feel really confident about it until I can see in a few weeks how they were consistent or not consistent in stacking those wins and stacking the process and continuing to get better.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'll feel really good about it. As crazy as this sounds, if they win
On
tomorrow
Saturday.
and look good in doing it when it's 3 straight wins, number one, but also against teams. The Hornets have been, frisky this season. And I think you and I talked about this maybe off air too, in that we both watched the Hornets and Sixers game over the weekend and kind of left with the same impressions and thoughts of this team's going to give the Bucks a lot of problems. There's some good players, at least young, energetic players, and just the way that they play. So as crazy as it sounds, I don't think any of us would have been having these thoughts before the season started. Doc Rivers has said the same thing too. Like, this is not where we thought or expected it to be. What was our record that we expected? I don't know. I know it wasn't this. But as crazy as all that is to say, like, yeah, you beat the Hornets, and I'm actually going to start to feel pretty good about where this is headed and what they've started to get on track. As we sit here, I know I mentioned what they've done the last 2 weeks, but this Friday morning, they have the 16th rated defense in the league. And the team that they are directly behind is the Charlotte Hornets. And all of a sudden, you're getting into the conversation of, and we did this last year too, and it didn't work out, but like a bunch of teams that are bunched up there, like, you piece together, especially if you're playing some inferior offenses, piece together some decent performances, and you could be knocking on the door of like 12, 11, 10 eventually defensively. And the Hornets have not been a good offensive team so far. I mean, LaMelo Ball is good. He has, continued to expand his shot profile as well. Brandon Miller continuing to progress, but that offense has not been good. The Bucks, we've talked about their offensive struggles. A 110.3, certainly not what anyone envisioned. And the Hornets, even worse. Charlotte's 26th in offense. So when you look at the schedule that you had really this month and during that, 12, 13 game stretch that I think a lot of us have pointed to, this is not only get right games, but these are let's also work on improving the defense and boosting that defensive rating number, because all the teams that are beneath the Bucks or around the Bucks offensively, you got a lot of those on your schedule. The Raptors, we already saw. 2 with the Pistons, you already saw one of those. You're getting the Bulls back once more. The Hornets, 2 games we just mentioned. The Wizards, you just played the Jazz. So it's a good opportunity for this team to not only win some games, but get more confidence defensively as well.
Yeah, defensive confidence is really important for this team. And you've been seeing Doc trying to find the right levers to pull, the right guys to put in the game for that. And on the other side of the ball, thinking about them offensively as well, that's been a little bit more of a struggle than I think most people expected for this Bucks team. I think an expectation was you come in, you're like a top 5, top 7 type of offense, and you get the ball rolling, having Dame and having Giannis kind of power that. But again, we've talked about what the absence of Chris Middleton means, but in addition to that, you've had some players who you know are better shooters than what they have been, just not being able to find their shooting touch. So like a Gary Trent Jr., a Brook Lopez, a Bobby Portis, some guys who you would expect to see a better shooting percentage from, they just haven't shot the ball well early. So hoping to see that continue to change as well. That was one reason for this current homestand that the Bucks are on, even though they're in Charlotte this weekend, but then they have their next 4 or 5 games at home straight. So it's one of those things where it's like, I'm hoping that being at home a bit more, having your own bed, the routine can also help offensively for this squad, but also just guys understanding what their roles are and understanding where they need to be on the court. Taurean Prince is one of those guys who, Doc mentioned he wanted to see him driving to the basket a little bit more and cutting a bit more, to the point where in the last game, he was like, okay, I need you to actually dial it back, like dial it back a little bit. Like, I like the cuts, but we need some of those threes too. So just guys finding their ways. And we mentioned coming into the season, it might be a little clunky to start. And I think we expected it to be clunky, but in wins. So it being clunky and then the losses just didn't feel right. But again, if they can continue showing the progress and also stack some wins, now they have a hole to dig out of, I feel pretty good about this team still, because again, we've been mentioning it's early. It's still early, despite the fact the Bucks had the record that they have and now sit at 4-8. They're still 2.5 games out the 3 seed right now. It's a lot of season left to play. And it's a team that seems like they're still very together and not questioning what they can be.
Yeah, I mean, we kept harping on it's early. Harping's probably the wrong way to put it, because it's true. It is early. Season's not over. It's not the Bucks aren't going to make the playoffs, and now you got to
Right.
immediately look into trading these guys. Like, your benefit in doing this now is that 70 games remain. So a good chunk of the season is left, and it took up until Wednesday night to get our third team above 500 in the Eastern Conference in the Orlando Magic. So at 4-8, piecing together back-to-back wins, you start to feel really good about yourself, and you look around and you say, well, we're only 2 losses back of the Knicks for the 4 seed. 2 losses back of the Magic, for that matter, for the 3 seed. That, all right, like it's you're probably not getting 1 or 2, but everything else is open. Just figure this out and stay healthy, and that's going to be the biggest spark for the turnaround. I've seen in the comments a few people bringing up some young players by name. They have been a big part of this in what we've seen for the Bucks, and especially those past 2 weeks metrics. So I do want to continue to take a look ahead to that, what we've learned in terms of the rotation and what it needs to be or should be for the Bucks, and whether or not we can expect to see a living point guard available, as Doc Rivers said, for the game against the Charlotte Hornets tomorrow afternoon. So we'll get into all of that conversation coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you now about our friends over at FanDuel, as you can get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel.com is where you get started. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So the young guys, Camille, as instrumental in this turnaround as anyone for the Bucks. I mean, oh, by the way, Giannis, that's a pretty big piece of it too, and in what he's done. But, you know, these young guys, when we talk about what you need to see, it's still the question that needs to be answered is the offensive piece for Andre Jackson Jr. They've started to try to find ways to use him with Giannis. We've seen him stashed in the dunker spot a lot. There was a couple of times, one time in particular against the Raptors, I believe that was, where Ajax, just a rarity. If we saw him, I'm just taking this all the way down and going directly to the basket, laying this in, jumping off a 1 foot too, Frank and I talked about, versus the 2. So things like that I think are going to be imperative, but the defense, it's always been unassailable. You know, as we talked about last year, it was the foul trouble, and it was how can you get the offense to fit? The fouls have been pretty good so far. I think there's only one game I recall that he had been in foul trouble, if you will. But, you know, you go back to what he did against Cade Cunningham down the stretch of that game where he was clearly bothering Cade with his ability to pick him up and stay with him. That to me is the big piece with Ryan Rollins too, because I don't know what DeLon Wright is currently dealing with. We heard early in the season he was on a minutes restriction. He is not hurt or injured, I should say. We want to make that clear because he's not been on the injury report.
Right.
But he hasn't looked like the same guy so far. And, you know, maybe that's age, right? He's not the age of this group per se with the Bucks, but he is older now and has, you know, quite a bit of playing time under him. Maybe that's it, but you still see those flashes every once in a while defensively, defensively. But the offense is where, again, who would have thought we'd be having this conversation of, the offense is really the problem for this team. Like, even with the defense being in the middle of the pack and so on, they, especially these last handful of games, the defense has done more than enough to give you a chance to win the game. It's the offense. And that's the other piece with DeLon Wright is I think that's the huge part of the conversation. I know there was displeasure with some breakdowns in that first game against the Celtics, and that was what kind of led to him losing time and being pulled from the rotation entirely. But the offense is where you just have a ton of questions of, you got to shoot that, or you got to be more aggressive there, because this doesn't work if we're starting to play, depending on who's out there with you, 5-on-3, with other teams knowing, well, he's not going to shoot it. He's not a shooter. He struggles at shooting. We'll worry about these guys.
Yeah, because for Wright, there are certain times where he actually makes a move, has a nice step back, and it's like there's a shot right there. He hesitates, then he passes the ball up, and it's like you got to be aggressive. It's finding the right balance, because of course you want to be a selfless player. You want to make sure the ball is moving. You want to make quick decisions. You want to make sure that you're not setting your team up poorly on the defensive end by taking a bad shot offensively. You understand all of that going into it, but it's just trying to find your moment and being confident when you're in the right moment to do it. DeLon Wright isn't the only one I would point to and say, you have to stop hesitating. There have been times where I saw Bobby Portis.
One guy started to change on Wednesday.
Yes, even we've seen Portis pass up some open threes and he'll drive in instead. You've seen Andre pass when it's that's a shot you have to take. It's happening with a few different guys, but they have to continue to build that chemistry and figure that out and hold each other accountable. Say, hey, man, you have to shoot that. And we've heard the team talk about that accountability piece of having open communication and pointing to someone like, hey, man, we need you to do this. You can't pass that up. You got to go up for that. To your point about Andre Jackson Jr., whose offense I think has been the biggest question on this team, even seeing him work out the dunker spot more often, and then seeing him actually finish from the dunker spot in itself was like an applause. Okay, we're working on it. We're getting somewhere. So you want to keep seeing that. And then too, with the young guys in particular, I love how AJ Green has been playing, even though a shot hasn't fallen the last couple of games for him. It's going to be like that. Didn't expect him to be a consistent 61% from three shooter, although it would have been fantastic to see. But just again, taking the shots as they're coming up and not being scared of the opportunity. That's one area for AJ Green where I've been really impressed and happy about his shot selection, even though we had his first 2-point shot against the Pistons of the season. But again, I like that. I like that the team is understanding we got to get more threes up. We got to make sure we're spacing right. It's just seeing them execute it. And again, the last couple of games have been a little bit more difficult with no Damian Lillard. And then against the Pistons, there was also no Ryan Rollins. So you really didn't have that backup point guard outside of DeLon Wright, who I believe had 8 assists in that game against the Pistons. So everybody just has to kind of continue to find their groove and find that chemistry with one another and work from there. And then too, when Dame and Giannis are in the game, the two of them understanding when to be aggressive, when to get their teammates involved, because a lot of times they're going to be the driver of the offense ball movement by that first action of making the defense react to what they're doing.
Yeah, DeLon Wright led the team in assists in that game against the Pistons. And he still has those abilities, creating the turnovers, loose balls, getting his hands on deflections and reading the passing lanes. That has skyrocketed for the Bucks in these past few games. Ryan Rollins, a big piece in that as well, as we've talked about. 6'10" wingspan.
Yeah,
for him.
He's 6'3", 6'10" wingspan.
Yeah, and I just went back and read the scouting report from 2 years ago with him coming out of college, out of Toledo, and that was a lot of the write-up of this kid is confident, moves his feet well. I think the comps that were out there were Anthony Simons was one of them. I can't remember who the other one was, but rotational caliber players that we're talking about here, but he just has this fearlessness that I think they missed. And even that game, his breakout against the Raptors, when you looked at the stat sheet and you saw Ryan Rollins is leading us in shots after 4 or 5 minutes, and Doc pulled him to the sideline at one point, and we asked after the game, were you telling him there, just cool it, man? We got Giannis, we got other, we don't need you to be heaving these. He said, no, I told him there's only one bad shot that I thought you were forcing it. Everything else, stay aggressive and keep taking those. That approach that we saw against the Raptors, you didn't see it for the first 24 minutes the following night against the Pistons. And that's the reality of where this team is. The way they're going to have to win games is kind of what we thought it would be last year, but it feels like it's amplified this season. So I'll explain what I mean with that and take a closer look at the Charlotte Hornets team that we have coming up on the schedule tomorrow. We'll get into that conversation next on Locked On Bucks. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rates of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privilege of a high net worth for any worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. So the offense has kind of been stuck in mud. And I think we had one other game where we may have said this, but I'm going to bring it up again of maybe that second half is the launching board. And this team is like, all right, that's what we needed. It did kind of feel like that. Giannis with 22 of their 24 points in the first quarter, 0 of 12 from his teammates. Second quarter, nothing else was working. And, that game against the Raptors, so many 3-point attempts, but I was talking about it with someone else as it was happening. And, everything that you were down and what we've seen this team playing with, you have to shoot more threes. That was one of the more alarming things about the start. The record, sure, some of the defensive issues, some inconsistency with rebounding, but the Bucks offense, the biggest reason why it's struggling is it's been inefficient outside of Giannis. You are not taking the shots any coach will tell you we need to be taking. It is and moving back to the 90s was the version of the Bucks offense that we had seen. And in this league, you're going to have to take threes as much as it may be aesthetically unappealing and some don't like it. If it's guys just come down and chuck up threes, I get it. But that's how you're going to have to play because of the math problem. And when you have a defense that looked as the Bucks defense did for especially the first few games and the questions that came over from last year, you are not going to win many games if you are not using the math on your side offensively. And that's the defense that you're throwing out there to slow down the opponents. So that was what stood out. They chucked up threes and you thought, even though they're missing them, this is what you need, because when they start to go, you're going to see some movement with the offense, certainly. But again, the simple math equation. So you come to that game Wednesday and you're like, what happened here? And we'd heard Doc Rivers, in fairness, say, we got to get more of these. We got to play this way. We want dunks and threes. And then you see that game against the Pistons and think, well, what are we doing here? There's been this continued, as you pointed to, guys passing up good shots, trying to get a better shot. I don't know what it was, just the fact that their back was firmly against the wall, maybe with an 18-point deficit. But all of a sudden in the third quarter, guys weren't passing those up and shots started to fall. And for Gary Trent Jr. especially, who hit 3 straight shots, it seemed like that also boosted his defense. And he was just playing with an extra pep in his step after he started to make those shots. I mean, we said he's not going to be a 20% 3-point shooter all season. But you do need one of these games where you see the ball go through the net. And then we started to see it happen for Brook Lopez too, that the hope is, okay, this was the breakout. This is where shots are starting to fall for this team, because it's as simple as if they're hitting shots, all of these numbers look differently. They're probably, I would probably tack on 2 more wins. We're talking about a 6-6 team if they're hitting some of these shots. But offense, to me, it's, as we said, it's still early. Offense has always been the issue and the thing that I've been most concerned with through these first 12 games. Not the defense, because frankly, the defense has been of late better than I think we expected it to be, but it's at least been in line with expectations. An offensive rating in the bottom 10
Not
and
expected.
the lack of threes, yeah, that's the issue.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think looking forward, it's like, well, how do you fix it? One thing that you hear this Bucks team talk a lot about after wins and losses is like, we know how we're supposed to play. And when they lose, they normally can point back and be like, because we didn't do what we were supposed to do in this area, whether it's the shot selection, whether it's the ball movement. It's something that they can point to almost directly after the game and be like, we didn't execute as we need to, and we know what we need to be doing. So I think that's a part of it, which I do like that they're able to be able to like, okay, the ball got sticky, we need to move the ball more, so on and so forth. But I think another big piece of that is just trying to find the right rotations and making sure that the lineups on the court are going to give you the best chance to succeed. And we saw Doc really trying to find what levers to pull, what guys should be in the rotation, what lineups work well together. And you've seen too, especially with Dame missing the last 2 games, which is a big piece for this Bucks team to be losing. A Bucks team doesn't already have that much playmaking, ball handling. Also, to not have Dame out there, it's going to affect those numbers over the last couple of games for sure. When you don't have Giannis, it's going to affect things. We haven't had Chris all season so far. And at this point, latest reports, coming up saying like it's just taking more time than anyone really expected. We're going to see how that ramps up for him over the next couple of weeks. But with a top-heavy team, when you're missing those 3 top-heavy players, it's going to affect the dynamic some. So it's like they have to figure out how they are playing together now, and figure out the right lineups, right combinations. And if you're without one of those players on the court, who is the offense going through, figuring out the flow, and also not letting your offense affect your defense, because then that can get you into some bigger trouble as well. When it's like, my shot's not falling, I'm not feeling good, and then you don't find another way to win, because the reality of basketball is you hope to take the good look every time. That's why I always look at, was it a good shot? Whether it went in or not, I'm saying good shot. And if it is a good shot, don't go in. You just got to get back on defense and try to figure out another way to win the game, because every game you're not going to shoot well. So you all have to find ways to win when the offense isn't working, but also try to understand what you're doing to make the offense as effective as possible when you're out there.
It's a happy balance, I think, offensively. Yes. The approach that this group really needs is a balance between what we've seen and Mike Budenholzer, and probably shading closer to Bud than this, where, the criticisms against Bud, you didn't run any offensive sets, like the whole let it fly mentality, and you didn't really work for things. It wasn't nuanced. Maybe, but that's where the league is headed. And that's what we really need to see more of from this group. You mentioned finding the right lineups and groupings too. Look, the all-time asterisk applied here, because it is just one game worth of data that we are looking at. And really, it's a second half and overtime that we're looking at. But the group that Doc Rivers played to close out that game against the Pistons, part of it, sure, was availability of other players and the guys that the Bucks were down. But, I think part of it was we've continually heard Doc mention what you just said, and that they're still searching for what's the right mix with the bench, what are the right groups to go to. I think what we saw to close out that Pistons game was largely because this works. Let's just keep riding it. Aspects of it, well, I don't have Dame or Bobby or Chris or Ryan Rollins even to turn to, but I think most of it was this is working. Let's keep doing this. And that grouping was the 5-man grouping of Brook Lopez, Giannis, Taurean Prince, Gary Trent Jr., and Andre Jackson Jr. that I think those guys played essentially the last 23 minutes of game time. They had a 100 defensive rating with that group on the floor together. Offensive rating, not great, right around where it is season as a whole for the Bucks at a 112, but a 100 offensive rating. That would be tops in the league. And look, it's one game. It was basically a half of play. It was the Pistons. I understand all of that. But like we said, you just need to see those numbers translate into success, because it's an easier, okay, this worked. Like everything that we tried, this worked. Let's keep doing this. And also, we saw the Bucks struggle in those spots, even with you should dominate this matchup. Your defense should get better. It wasn't the case last year. So that is a very, very encouraging thing to me of, all right, there's iterations where this will work. We've talked about Giannis and Taurean Prince together and some switchability there. Andre Jackson Jr. and what he gives you. But Gary Trent Jr., I think some people disagreed with us with the start that he got off to in the season. He is a much better defender than Malik Beasley. And I think you've seen most of that so far to start the season. I don't know that that's a 5-man grouping you're going to see a ton of, maybe in the interim if, Chris and Dame and Ryan Rollins are still out. And I don't know that it's something you really want to lean on or can lean on in the playoffs against tougher competition. But the most important part to me is, all right, we're starting to find more of these groups that work, that are producing these numbers, and we can maybe sprinkle out this guy, add in this guy, and things like that. So to me, that was another very encouraging sign coming from that game.
I would agree with that. And then I know as we're wrapping up here, just one other thought that comes to mind with thinking about the rotation and the lineup and the guys who have been in it. We've mentioned the names Andre Jackson Jr., AJ Green, Ryan Rollins in particular as just guys, young guys who have come in and helped the rotation while they're out there. Guys who look like they are solidifying their spot in the Bucks rotation despite when whoever comes back from injury, like guys who are going to have to be out there playing. And what I'm hoping to continue to see from the young guys is that they continue to stack good games, because we've had spurts before where we thought Jordan Nwora was going to be somebody. We've had spurts thinking Don Maker was going to be the guy. So what I want to continue to see from the 3 current young Bucks on the squad is just continuing to stack minutes. And even if it's a situation where you're only getting so many minutes in the game because Doc is riding a hot hand or working with a rotation that he likes in that particular game, make the most of your minutes. And then even for the other young guys who come in during garbage time, do something with the time. Show something that put on tape. Like, I deserve more playing time. I see a comment cough, Beauchamp. Like, hey, listen, Marjan, when you get in the game, even if that's garbage time, I want to see you trying to do something well, stack good performances. Because even for the bench guys, who knows? You hope that you're healthy throughout a season. But there might be a time when you're called upon, and those moments can really dictate how things go for you going forward. I mean, look at Ryan Rollins, just being someone who was kind of thrown out there, and he's done the most with his minutes. And now he's somebody who jumped DeLon Wright in the rotation. He is somebody who the Bucks are going to be counting on. So again, that's something I'm keeping an eye on too, because I know I have faith in Gary Trent Jr. figuring it out. I know what Dame is. I know who Giannis is. When Chris gets back, I know what Chris can do. But those younger players, I want to see them continuing to stack good performances on one another. And at the very least, a consistent defense when the shot's not falling, just making sure you're taking the right shot. So that's an area for the Bucks I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on as well, because we might have something here, Justin.
Yeah. And last few things here I'll point out is we talked about this after one of the games. I know I talked about it on my post-game show as well, but and somebody else was mentioning it in the comments here. One of the biggest gains you get from Ajax on the floor is, you think about the Bucks offense last year, at times this season as well, where it's taking you 7 seconds to cross half court. You get across half court and 2/3 of the shot clock is gone. Depending on the groupings you have on the floor, if it's already struggling, like, before you know it, you're not getting good offense, and nothing is organized and set, and you're into scramble mode. Andre Jackson Jr. has the ability to do that to other teams, because we see him picking up guys full length of the court, staying with them. There's a handful of times against both the Pistons and the previous game against the Raptors where it was like, man, they're like routinely crossing midcourt at like 17 seconds, getting close to 16 a couple of these times. That was Ajax. That was Ryan Rollins too, doing the same. So being able to turn the tables some is helpful. And as Doc pointed to in that Pistons game especially, we had Andre picking up guys full length of the court, making them work to cross half court. And then in the third quarter, once they got past midcourt, we dropped into a zone where they just didn't really know, wait a minute, what's going on here that you're pressuring me full length of the court? And now you guys are playing zone. So it's a valuable asset. Last year, he was one of the only guys that could confidently cross half court in a timely manner too. something seems a little off about the Ajax ball handling and point guard play so far this year, but Ryan Rollins has excelled there. It hasn't stood out as much. And that's, look, they're not going to play like this way all the time, as much as we may want to see it. As Doc even said, Dame plays at his own pace. Dame is not an up-tempo player. Like, he's more deliberate, but it's finding moments for these guys and changing the pace where teams can't just get set in. Bucks are just going to play a slow tempo style. Like, that's the important part that this group has brought. And I'd be remiss if I didn't throw more small sample size numbers at you, Camille, as we wrap here. But when the Bucks have their three most impactful defenders on the floor, Andre Jackson Jr., Giannis, and Brook Lopez, we've seen more of it this week because of the injuries, but they're +6 in terms of net rating, and their defense is 106.5, which, again, if you're even flirting with 110, you're doing pretty good in the league these days. So that matches the eye test as well. Offense hasn't been great with those three, but it's a matter of, okay, we need to see more of it. And the offense from the other two guys, assuming it's Dame, whoever it is, that's what's going to be important. The one to make you salivate even more is we only saw this in one game, but when it was Giannis, Brook, Andre, joined by Ryan Rollins and AJ Green, that may have been the eureka moment and the best mix of offense and defense. And granted, it was against the Toronto Raptors. But the point of all of it is there is something to this with a skeleton of Giannis, Brook Lopez, and Andre Jackson Jr. And we've started to see those defensive numbers move in the right way with those guys on the floor.
Yeah, we have. And that's what you want to keep seeing. Like, just stack it. You saw good performance there. What can you do the next time when you're out in the court? And again, every game is not going to play out the same way. You're going to have different challenges, different things you're trying to figure out. It might be a cold shooting game, a hot shooting game, whatever the case may be. But control what you can control. And for the Bucks, it just comes down to, again, executing, understanding where you're at, even just seeing like when they do get in situations defensively where the other team is driving and kicking and trying to put the Bucks in the scramble defense, understanding where you need to close out to. So again, just wanting to continue to see that for the Bucks. We don't have an injury report at the time of this recording.
Yeah, we won't. Yeah, we won't get one until about 4:30 or 5 today.
Right. So keep your eyes on that, guys, because if hopefully Dame is back from the concussion. If Ryan Rollins is healthy to go, I know he mentioned after he injured his shoulder against the Raptors, like, it's not a super serious injury. I should be back soon. So seeing what that looks like, because I'm actually excited to see once we start getting all these guys back, what does it look like? Like, what do the rotations look like? What does the gameplay look like? So I'm excited. Like, 4-8 Bucks, I'm still very excited to see what they got cooking.
Tomorrow afternoon, 2:00 in the Queen City, the Bucks and the Charlotte Hornets. And, it's an improving Charlotte Hornets team. So it is going to be a test for the Bucks that they have. But it's a Hornets team that, especially the last couple of weeks, is again, I hate using that since it's only a couple of weeks long, but they've been struggling big time in some metrics, especially on the offensive side. Defense, they got that athleticism. If, similar to the Bucks, if they're not hitting threes, they're going to be in trouble offensively. Yeah. So keep an eye on that. And hopefully the second half was the breakout for this Bucks offense. The 3-pointers are going to start to fall now at a more regular cadence. That will do it for today's show, though. For Camille, I am Justin. We will talk to you guys once again Monday on Locked On Bucks.